my name is Rachel Adams, and this is the Serene Support Home Birth Podcast. I am a birth and postpartum doula, as well as a yoga instructor and a realtor with Better Homes and Gardens. So I'm going to throw it over to Hope. She can introduce herself.
Hi, so my name is Hope. I am 28 years old. I now have two kids, one 5-year-old girl and now a 6-week-old son. Both of them born natural. So I'm happy to report both stories with my kids. I had one with a birth center birth in San Diego, because that's where I'm originally from. And then we now live in Norfolk, Virginia. So that's where my son's just born at home.
Great. So we'll start with your birth center birth. So how did you find out that you were pregnant? That was your firstborn. Were you excited?
Yeah, so with my first, how old was I? I want to say I was 23. I want to say, my husband had come back from deployment like a year prior. So we were both excited we had been trying for a long time, and I had 2 miscarriages actually before my daughter. So we were both really excited with my daughter to find out that we were pregnant. I originally was going to do a hospital birth, and I had seen like a traditional OB. Most had closed down because of budget. It was the military hospital, but that one closed down. Unfortunately, they closed down the labor ward because there was like a pending lawsuit. So I eventually had to switch to a natural birth center, which was nearby a hospital. So originally my husband was not looking forward to a natural birth because he deployed at my 3rd trimester. So he was going to be absent for my daughter's birth. So he was kind of hesitant about doing natural while he wasn't there. But eventually I got to talk him into it because I made him watch The Business of Being Born. And that was his first introduction of natural birth. And then he got on board. My family was a little bit harder to talk them into it, but eventually I decided to go that route. It was actually my stepmom, who's a nurse, that talked me into natural birth because she had 3 epidurals during her son's birth, and they all like canceled out, and she just was like paralyzed from the leg. So she felt from the waist up. So she felt everything in birth and was not able to move. So she was telling me like, you might want to try natural, because I wish I did. So I eventually met with this birth center in San Diego. It's like one of the very few birth centers that we have in the area. And the owner is actually a board certified lactation consultant. And I met with my midwives. I had 3 midwives actually with my daughter's birth. So I felt comfortable with having a team instead of doing like the hospital birth, where my OB told me directly that he wasn't going to be at my birth. So I felt a more personalized care with midwifery. So that went great. My pregnancy was very simple. I didn't get any morning sickness. The only issue I had was I had placenta previa like really early, so it caused a little bit of pain. But pregnancy was very simple, so I felt comfortable doing natural. I didn't have any issues. And then on my actual labor day, it was a little bit intense. My water broke at midnight on Friday the 13th. So in May. So I was a little apprehensive about being labor on Friday the 13th, and everyone was taking bets to see if she was going to be born on Friday the 13th. But my water broke really early, but I wasn't getting any contractions at all during that time. So my midwife was just like, go back to bed, chill out, get some rest, which is easier said than done. So I didn't really sleep because I was too excited. And then as the day started to progress, I still wasn't getting any contractions. And then they just asked me to come in to their office around like 3 p.m. that night or that day. And they were starting a little bit, but they were very spaced out. They weren't consistent at all. So they actually wanted me to get acupuncture because they were worried that my labor wasn't going to progress quick enough. So I got acupuncture for the first time. And then I want to say within 3 hours of that, my labor started. And we're definitely more consistent, 5 minutes apart. And then around 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock that night, I caught a fever, so they just had me come into the birth center to check me out. And when I went into the birth center that night, they checked my cervix to see how dilated I was. And I, of course, was so used to the 10 centimeter dilation where you think that's when you're going to push. So they checked my cervix and I was 3 centimeters, and I felt so upset, like, oh no, it's going to be forever until I give birth. So they just had me sit on a toilet as long as possible.
Dilation
And then
station.
45 minutes later, yeah.
Mhm.
So 45 minutes later, I got in the birth center tub because they have a tub in the room. And I just felt her head coming down so quick. So it only took 45 minutes of sitting on a toilet before I was like actually pushing. But I ended up having to give birth on the bed because my position in the tub was difficult for the midwives to reach the baby and check her. So they had me get out, and I was laying on my back, and I delivered on my back, which in hindsight, I would not recommend. Yeah, so she was born at 12:11 in the morning on Friday, the 14th of May. So
Wow. So just barely on the
like 10
14th.
minutes, she just barely missed Friday the 13th. Yeah, yeah. So, woo, she wasn't born on Friday the 13th. And I think it was a full moon that day too. So I was like, oh, we don't need any like werewolf children. So yeah, that was my labor story with her.
Great.
Yeah, and then I got to call my so the phone number kept coming up weird on my mom's phone because it was a ship calling. She kept declining the call the whole day, not knowing it's my husband calling. And finally, after she was born, my mom was like, "Oh my God, I'm getting this weird call all day, and I don't know what it is." And I looked, and I'm like, "This is my husband calling." And so he got to talk to me like 10 minutes after she was born, and I got to hear her cry, and it was just beautiful. So it was nice.
So nice. And so cool that your mother was the one that kind
And
of
then he got home, I think, when she was born.
encouraged that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I come from a long line of labor and delivery
So it was like
nurses.
my mom, my stepmom. It was actually weird. Yeah. Yeah, it was weird. My stepmom was like so pro natural, and she's a nurse. And I was like, oh, that's not typical. But she was like, yeah, just go natural. Why not? My mom was actually the one that was apprehensive. And she had two, I don't know if I was born C-section, but I know my brother was born via C-section, because hers was like an emergency C-section for some reason with my brother. So she was kind of freaked out about natural, thinking that everything's like emergency. So it's weird that the nurse is the one that calmed me down. So she was like, yeah, go natural.
That's great.
So when I actually gave birth, I had my whole family there. I had my dad, my stepmom, my mom, my friend. Like I had everyone there. And because it's a birth center, they just let whoever you want in there. And so everyone's like standing corner watching me give birth.
Wow,
Which
that's
I
so
don't think I
cool.
would do again if I ever had any more kids. I would definitely, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's nice to have that support postpartum, but it's a little more primitive with birth, and you'd like to be,
Yeah.
intimate.
It's
Yeah.
a little much with like your dad standing there while you're like full naked having a baby. Don't recommend it.
Anything postpartum wise you want to note?
Postpartum, I was pretty good. I stayed with my mom for the first week because my husband didn't come home until she was 4 months old. So my mom wanted me to stay with her so that I could get acclimated and have support. I didn't have any like postpartum anxiety until like the final day that I was at my mom's house about to leave. And I just had like this uncontrollable like crying fit that just wouldn't stop. It just was like nonstop crying for no reason. I don't even remember what it was about. It was like a movie. I think it was The Holiday or something we were watching, and I couldn't stop crying. And I just had so much anxiety that one day. But other than that, my postpartum went pretty good. I didn't have any issues. I felt happy. I was bonding with my baby, and it was nice. And I did do placenta encapsulation, so I was rigorous about that. So maybe that helped.
That's great to hear. You had that support, and that really makes a difference.
Yeah, it really does. Which is why it's different with his like birth. It was totally different because we moved here to Virginia, and I have no family or friends out here. So the support was just my husband this time versus my daughter's birth. It was my entire family and friends.
So let's move on to your second. How was that different? Let's start with the pregnancy.
Yeah. So his was like very different than my first one. We found out that I was pregnant like very early. I just had a feeling I was pregnant. We had just gone to Mexico like a month and a half prior for our anniversary. We got married in Cabo. So we did a trip to Cabo this past June. And then when we got home, I just felt like I was pregnant. And I told my husband, and he was like, oh my gosh, what the heck? Because we kept thinking we weren't going to have any more kids. We just kept saying to each other, like, oh, we're done. We'll just be that one family that has one kid and we'll be good. And then when we found out we were pregnant, it was definitely a shock. And I had to definitely come to terms with that because I was like, oh my gosh, am I ready for 2 kids? I already have a 5-year-old and she's a lot. She's very energetic and hyperactive. So with him, I definitely was not prepared for it, but it turned out great. My pregnancy was pretty good. I definitely had more aches and pains this pregnancy. I had like symphysis pubic dysfunction where it was just painful to walk around. I would get these random aches and pains like my back or my neck or whatever. So definitely this pregnancy took me out more than my first. I had to regularly go to chiropractors because it just was more difficult for me pregnancy wise. Pregnancies that I know why I'm that lucky that I never get morning sickness. But other than that, it was pretty simple. So he was a good baby. He kicked around a lot. He was very active in the womb compared to my daughter. Because with my daughter, when she was in the womb, I constantly had to like move my belly to make sure she was good. And he was just kicking and punching and twirling and all that stuff. So I didn't ever have to guess that he was in there because he made himself known pretty well. But this pregnancy was different, obviously, because of COVID. I definitely knew very early on that I didn't want to be in a hospital again, more because of COVID, that I just didn't even want to bother with hospitals because they're a lot more strict with their regulations now. But I struggled with out here in Virginia because there's not that many birth centers compared to like San Diego. We have birth centers in hospitals. We have birth centers out of hospitals. They're just kind of spaced throughout the county. And here there's only like one real birth center and it's all the way in Richmond, which is like an hour and a half from me. And I just knew that we weren't going to be able to do that. Because from my daughter's birth, the time between I started active labor to when she was born was about 7-ish hours, 6 hours. So I knew that if I had a second one, they always say your second one's faster. I didn't want to have to worry about traveling an hour and a half all the way to Richmond to have a baby, which thank God I didn't. His birth was very, very quick. It was almost too quick. But I had my midwife, the Three Rivers Midwifery. My midwife was Cindy. She was awesome. And this time I actually invested in a doula because I didn't have a doula last time.
Wonderful. Who was your
doula? Like it was important to have a doula this time because I didn't have family and friends. Yeah, it was Kiera at Empower. So she was my doula for Atlas. I just liked the idea of having a doula because it was just me and my husband this time because he was going to experience his first birth. He wasn't there for my daughters, but he was able to be home for this birth. So I wanted him to have both a support person to understand what's going on and to assist me, obviously, and also to just have a secondary person because I'm used to having family and friends. And I just wanted another support person. Even though I had 3 midwives again this time, I didn't want too many people because with my first, after having everyone in the room, I just knew I didn't want a ton of people in the room. So Kiera was my like multi-purpose person. She was like my placenta lady. She did my encapsulation. She did my birth photography. She was my doula. I tried to have everything limited to just those core people that needed to be there because I felt like it was more relaxing to me this time. And they did do childbirth classes at Empower, I do as collective. So I did that regularly and then kind of go through what you want your ideal birth experience to be. And me and my husband both were like, we'll just have a home birth and just have a water birth in my living room in front of the fireplace. And it'll be really cute and homey and romantic, which didn't turn out that way, but that's okay. So with his labor, it was just 0 to 100 like in 5 seconds. I woke up in the middle of the night around like 2 a.m. I had like a pretty strong contraction and they were like every 12 minutes at that point. So I was like, oh, I got plenty of time. I just gave my midwife a heads up like, hey, I got contractions happening, just so you know. But they were pretty strong, so I couldn't go back to sleep very easily. And then at like 6 in the morning, they started to be every 7 minutes. So that was like 4 hours later. And they were getting pretty strong at that point. And my husband was getting ready for work at that time. And I told him, you might want to just like not go to work today because I just have a feeling today's going to be a busy day. And I was actually planning on taking my daughter to school that morning like I normally do. And he was like, I'll take her to school. Like, you're having contractions, like whatever. So he left around 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock to drop her off at school. And at that time, my contractions were very random. They would be every 5 minutes, then every 3 minutes, then every 2 minutes. So it was just random sporadic contractions at that point. And they were pretty strong. So I called my doula first and I was like, hey, I'm having strong contractions. And my doula lives a bit far from me. So I told her, like, I don't know if you want to start heading this way. Because like right now, like I had to breathe through them. They were pretty strong at that point. So she started to head this direction and she said she was going to be about an hour before she could be at my house. And then I called my midwife and told her the same thing. And my midwife at first wasn't going to come because she could tell that I was having strong contractions, but she didn't think they were close enough where she might needed to come. But it wasn't until I started to have contractions on the phone. Sound pretty ready. So she clock from dropping my daughter off at school that morning. And our dog is very hyperactive. So he wanted to take the dog to like doggy daycare. So he came back and I had just hopped in the shower when he got home because I just felt like I needed like something. I just needed something. And so I hopped in the shower and he took the dog and then he came back like 30 minutes later and my contractions were strong. I had to breathe through them like crazy. They were like every few minutes or so. And I told him, like, call the midwife to see how far she is. And she was still, like a half an hour or so. And then at one point, I had to get on my hands and knees in the shower because I felt like he was coming down. And so I was on my hands and knees in the shower, and my husband's like freaking out, like not knowing what to do. The support people aren't here yet. And then I started getting that ejectile response, and I was pushing in the shower, and no one was there yet. They were 20 minutes away. And I was like, oh no, we're about to give birth at home with no one here. And of course, my mom calls during this time. And my husband answered the phone regrettably. And she was just like, call 911. No one's there yet. What are you doing? Like, you need somebody. And he was like setting up our bedroom with tarps and stuff, like preparing for birth, like the midwife said on the phone. And my doula was trying to tell me everything on the phone to like keep the baby in, which is so counterproductive to what a normal doula does in that instance. But she wanted to like stall it so they could be there. And then they finally showed up around 10 o'clock, 10:15 in the morning. And then my son was born 30 minutes after they arrived. So it was pretty quick from when they got there to when he was born. So my labor was very fast. It was in total 8 hours from the very first contraction to when he was born, but they sped like crazy. Thankful that my midwife and my doula were there at his birth because we were kind of stressing out. No one was going to be there, but we managed and we had a natural birth at home. I had him on the bed. It was a very different response this time around because with my daughter's birth, I didn't have that pushing reflex because I was laying on my back mostly. So I was kind of forcing pushing versus this time where I didn't have to do much work at all. He was pushing on his own.
Were you in?
And this time I was very adamant that I wanted to be on hands and knees because I have heard so many stories about hands and knees are better for birth. So when I was in the shower, I was on hands and knees the entire time. But I was kind of flexing my back a bit so that he was more cocooned so he wouldn't come out quick. And then when I got on the bed, I was on hands and knees. And then as soon as I felt a strong urge to push, I just kind of like sat up a little bit on my hands and knees and he just plopped out. So I definitely was more adamant about hands and knees because it definitely makes birth a lot easier that time around versus on my back. I just felt like I constantly had to do pushing that didn't feel natural to me, and it actually forced me to tear a bit. So this time his birth was a lot more seamless as far as um, how he came out, and like my postpartum care was a lot different. Like with my daughter, I tore. I had to get stitches. With him, I barely tore at all. It was like micro tears that like didn't need any sort of care whatsoever. I just felt way better postpartum this time around. I was more active, walking around. Of course, my midwife kept yelling at me, stop doing all these things, like just chill out and relax. But I just felt so much energy than I did before. And
That's
this
great to
birth
hear.
was just totally different compared to my daughters, because I felt like with my daughters, it was definitely a game. Yeah. So this time around, I didn't have much of a waiting game at all. He just kind of came out quick.
Wonderful. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah. Yeah, it came out great.
Awesome. And he's
I
6
felt
weeks now,
like
so you're not quite done with the whole postpartum period.
natural birth for me is like how, yeah, I'm still 6 weeks, so it's still kind of like brand new. But I just felt like natural birth for me was so much more empowering than hospital birth. I feel like with hospital births, for me at least, and I part of it is because I hate hospitals, really. But I just felt like hospitals, you have to relinquish a lot of control. And my day life is I have to have some sort of control over things. And I felt like it's so much more empowering to experience that fully, where I'm not, you know, I feel like with epidurals, at least from the people I've experienced, they're not fully part of the experience because they don't feel the contractions or the pain or like whatever. So I felt like for me personally, I wanted to experience that pain. I wanted to be able to say like, yeah, I did that. This is my trophy experience. And it was just a magical moment for me. I highly, if I have more kids, which we definitely aren't planning to, I would definitely do natural all over again. It's just how I feel most comfortable, especially bonding wise. I felt like there was a stronger bond because I got to have that moment with them, especially at home. The home birth experience is way more different than a birth center, because I didn't want to get in a car and go anywhere when you're like deep in pain. Like that's just not fun. And this time around, it just felt nice to wake up and be in my house and have my snacks and my favorite blankets and my pillows and just be in my natural space, having a baby naturally.
That's great. Any words of wisdom you'd give any woman that wants to have a home birth?
Oh no, again. I feel like the difference for me that made it so much more at ease is just being around a group of women with similar mindsets, and doulas and midwives, and taking childbirth classes where there's more of a natural mindset. Because I feel like once you encompass yourself around people that make you feel like it's not impossible, then you're more likely to do it and you feel more empowered to do it. And it seems more attainable, I guess. Versus when I was pregnant with my daughter, most of the people in my ear were people that were traditional hospital births, telling me, oh my gosh, you'll never be able to deal with the pain. You're going to want the epidural, blah, blah, blah. All the like scary stories that people tell you about birth. And I felt like once I, which is why it's nice that I moved to Virginia, because I got to just have the support that I wanted versus the support that I had. Not that my family and friends weren't supportive, but it's just a different support when you can select the support that you want and has the same mindset, where I got to choose my midwives and my doula and my husband to be there, who had the same idea of a birth experience that I had. And I just felt like the more I surround myself with like-minded women and like-minded people, it just made it seem like it's not really as scary as people think.
Yeah, that's great. And it's great to think about it like that there's an expert for surgery and for high risk births, which is the OB, and there's an expert for natural births, and that's the midwife. They know, comfort techniques. That's not, drugs and things like that. They can give you other things to use. And as well as having a doula definitely helps as well. So I'm glad that you had that experience.
Yeah, I definitely felt like midwives, they helped me a lot.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Hope. I'm sure it will empower and inspire lots of women. I love how we're talking about the positives about childbirth, and we're not talking about the scary fears and negative things. So this was great.
Thank you. Yes, definitely.
Well, I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for coming on. Bye.
Thank you so Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.
Alrighty. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We have lots of other birth podcasts that you can listen to if you enjoyed this
Yeah.
one. And I also post prenatal yoga videos and just yoga videos in general for everyone to do. So
Oh,
yes. And
oh,
I'll post all the links. I know that
oh,
you
awesome. My daughter loves yoga, so I'm sure she'll want to join me.
great. That's awesome. I love when it's a family endeavor. So I'll post those links of the midwife and the doula that you used. I know people love recommendations. You're from the
Oh,
Hampton Road, Virginia Beach area, correct?
yes. Yeah, I live in Norfolk. I live in Norfolk, and I used Kiera was my doula at Empower, and then Cindy at Three Rivers was my midwife.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I will link those below so other people can check them out. I know Hope recommends them. So, and you heard their story of how they came. It came.
Yeah.
Her second labor was definitely fast. That can happen, but I'm glad that they made it there.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
Yes, me too.
All righty. Well, have a great day. Bye.